Hello and welcome to you all this morning, joining us in person and around Europe and around the world, indeed online, for this conference on the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, 2023 marks 10 years of the initiative, so it's an excellent time to take stock of where we're at, where the future might lie, and how future collaboration can be enhanced. We've seen the world go through massive changes in the last 10 years. We've come out of a pandemic, we've seen various other crises, so it's really, really an instructive and turning point to discuss this important initiative. Connectivity and infrastructure has never been more important, and I think we're going to hear about that a lot today from our great speakers. We will, of course, have an opening address from the ambassador, and then we will move into our panel discussion. My name is Jennifer Baker. I will be your moderator today, posing the questions that you can send through to us using slido.com on your smartphones or your tablets. If you're watching online, you can use the box underneath this video, or if you're in the room, of course, you can please scan the QR code and put your questions to our speakers. I'll be getting them all here through my tablet, and hopefully in the next hour or so we will have time to get through as many of those as possible. And of course, if you're interested in discussing or sharing on social media, please use the hashtag #EADebates. Well, let's get started. We are, as I say, very pleased and honoured to have with us, to set the scene and give us the background and the opening for today's debate, the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary and Head of Mission of the People's Henriette Corner of China to the European Union, Fu Tsung. Thank you very much, Ambassador. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good morning, everybody. First, it's a pleasure to attend this event, and thank you all for coming. Let me start by thanking Euractiv for hosting today's event. I'm very happy to be here and get together with friends from China, Europe, and the Belt and Road partner countries as we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative. Today's event also provides us with a good opportunity to not only look back, but also, more importantly, to look ahead and explore how to better promote Belt and Road cooperation from a new starting point. So to this end, I would like to focus in my speech on three key words. The first key word is history. Over 2,000 years ago, our ancestors, trekking across vast steppes and desert, opened the transcontinental passage connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa, known today as the Silk Road. By navigating rough seas, they also created sea routes linking the East with the West, namely the maritime Silk Road. Spanning thousands of miles and years, these ancient Silk routes opened windows of friendly engagement among nations and embodied the spirit of peace and cooperation, openness and inclusiveness, mutual learning and mutual benefit. The Silk Road spirit has become a great heritage of human civilization. Entering the 21st century, mankind has reached an age of great success, of great progress, great transformation, and profound changes, and witnessed a host of global challenges, including deficit in peace, deficit in development, and a deficit in governance. It was in this context that President Xi Jinping proposed in 2013 the building of the Silk Road Economic Belt and the 21st Century Maritime Silk Road, respectively in Kazakhstan and in Indonesia, which today we call the Belt and Road Initiative. With a focus on connectivity, the initiative follows the principle of extensive consultation, joint contribution, and the shared benefits. The philosophy of open, green, and clean cooperation and the high standard people-centered, and sustainable approach, with the aim of building a community with a shared future for mankind. By reinvigorating Asian Silk routes, the BRI has become a road to opportunities and a road to prosperity. The second keyword I wish to share today is harvest. Over the past decade, China and the Belt and Road partner countries have continuously promoted connectivity in terms of policy, infrastructure, trade, finance, and the people-to-people contacts. The BRI has evolved from a concept into real actions, from vision into reality, making it the world's broadest based and the largest platform for international cooperation and the global public good. As of June this year, China has signed over 200 BRI cooperation documents with more than 150 countries and 32 international organizations. The BRI has stimulated nearly $1 trillion of investment, generated more than 3,000 projects, created 420,000 jobs for local countries, and lifted about 40 million people out of poverty. The World Bank estimates that with the BRI, 7.6 million will get out of extreme poverty and 32 million out of moderate poverty by 2030. It is fair to say that the initiative has not only benefited China, but also the whole world. A report by the think tank Bruegel also shows that over the last 10 years, the BRI has been positively received globally, despite the world economic recession and the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. As Chinese ambassador to the EU, I personally follow very closely the important role this important initiative plays in promoting exchanges and cooperation between China and the EU countries. Few people may know that the term itself, the Silk Road, was actually coined by a German geographer, Ferdinand von Richthofen, more than a century ago. Thanks to Asian Silk Road routes, the earliest links between China and Europe went back as early as the 1st century AD. The BRI, which now extends from the most dynamic Asia-Pacific economies in the East to the largest single market of the EU in the West, serves as a new platform for China-Europe cooperation. Let me give you a few examples. The China-Europe Railway Express, dubbed as Steel Camel Fleets, has opened up 84 routes, reaching 217 cities in 25 European countries. The Greek port of Piraeus has overcome many difficulties to become a top port in the Mediterranean Sea in terms of throughput capacity. The Budapest to Belgrade Railroad, which is expected to be completed by 2024, is a flagship BRI project between China and the Central and the Eastern European countries. And also as an example of successful aligning Chinese and the European railway technologies and standards. Other projects including the Pelgesak, sorry for the pronunciation, Pelgesak Bridge in Croatia and the CATL's new battery plant in Hungary are also witnessing the vigor and vitality of the BRI. These concrete examples fully demonstrate that there are huge opportunities from Belt and Road cooperation, opportunities that both China and Europe cannot afford to miss. The third keyword I want to share today is confidence. Speaking of confidence, we should first have confidence in the future prospect of the BRI. The initiative, though launched by China, is by no means China's solo show, but rather a chorus involving all partner countries. In today's world, China continues to enjoy robust momentum of growth among all major economies. To drum up support for Belt and Road cooperation, China will firmly apply the new development philosophy, foster a new development paradigm, and promote openness at a faster pace and at a higher level. At the same time, with the refinement of its blueprint over the last decade, the BRI has gained broad economic support in partner countries. This gives us ample reason to believe that this initiative will be able to create a splendid chapter of close cooperation and mutual benefit in the next decade. We should also have confidence in the future of China-EU cooperation. In this ever-changing world, we are facing challenges like never before. China and the EU are two major forces upholding world peace, two big markets promoting shared developments, and two great civilizations promoting human progress. This is how we see the relationship between China and the EU. It is therefore incumbent upon us to work hand in hand to make the world a safer place and promote well-being of humanity. Just like what the EU High Representative Mr. Joseph Borrell said, China's Belt and Road Initiative and EU's Global Gateway are not exclusive, but complementary. And promoting global development is a common goal of both sides. We share this view and hope to discuss with an open mind possible ways of cooperation between the BRI and the Global Gateway in order to create new areas of growth for China-EU cooperation. In fact, green is the most distinctive color of the BRI, which is highly consistent with the EU's approach to development. When it comes to cooperation on green infrastructure projects, China and the EU have a lot to offer to each other. It's also important to note that China has already worked with European countries, including France, Belgium, and Italy, in third country markets, and launched projects in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. This may well be a priority area of China-EU cooperation in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, as the German proverb goes, those who work alone add, those who work together multiply. So in this spirit, let us join hands and work closely to inject more light, more wisdom, more confidence, and more hope to this challenging world. Thank you. Once again, thank you for coming. I'll be looking forward to answering your questions. Right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I thank you for those words. And I will add another proverb, which is, of course, if you want to go fast, go alone.
Indeed.
If you want to go far, go together. I'd like to call to the stage now one of our other speakers to join us, please. The Deputy Head of Mission of Kazakhstan to the European Union, Timur Sultangozhin. Please, if you would take a seat. And I would also say hello to our online speakers joining us remotely. We are delighted to have Alicia Garcia Herrero, Senior Fellow at Bruegel. As we heard there, Bruegel have recently done a study on this. And Dr. Wang Wen, who is Executive Dean of Zhongyang Institute for Financial Studies, Deputy Dean and Distinguished Professor of Silk Road School, the Renmin University of China, and Executive Director of the China-US People-to-People Exchange Research Center. So thank you both very much for being with us as well. Timur, let me turn to you first and ask you for your initial reaction to the Ambassador's opening remarks and to give us a sense of, from the Kazakhstan view, where are we 10 years on?
Well, first of all, thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you, Ambassador, for inviting and organizing this important event. Indeed, I want to congratulate the government of China and everyone else present in this room with the 10th anniversary of this mega project, the BRI. From the Kazakhstan's point of view, it is absolutely obvious that such projects are really welcomed and need to be supported, especially in taking into account the need for connectivity and transportation development across the Eurasian continent. Well, needless to say that Kazakhstan is known in the world as one of the largest landlocked countries. Kazakhstan's economy is largely based and is reliable on the transportation routes. And more to say, the BRI initiative was announced in Astana in 2013. It was a very historic moment, and since then Kazakhstan considers itself as a buckle on this belt, due to the fact that Kazakhstan is rightly situated on the way of a few very key and important corridors, transport corridors, like north-south and east-west. But I would like to add that Kazakhstan has not been sitting idle, and since 15 years ago, our government has been investing tremendously into the development of the infrastructure and transport logistical hardware, together with our Chinese partners. Over 15 years, we have gathered and invested over $35 billion of investments. Right now, within the BRI, and together with our international partners, we have also invested over 20 billion into concrete BRI projects that run via Kazakhstan. So I think it is needless to say what is the positive and tremendous effect this gives onto the economy, the prosperity, and the ability of people to create more jobs, more supply chains, and to develop all sorts of hardware communications. To be exact, in last 15 years, over 2,500 railways were built in Kazakhstan, over 20,000 new roads, new logistical hubs at the Caspian port like Aktau and Kurek. A big and one of the most important dry ports was established at the border of Kazakhstan and China, Horgos. It has a crucial role in implementing one of the most important projects that Kazakhstan sees right now is the Middle Corridor. Apart from that, additional dry port is being constructed and will soon be complete. Kazakhstan is also implementing few very important projects with China, including building a logistical hub in Xi'an province. And coming to that, in May this year, our president, Mr. Tokayev, has been in China with the official visit, and over 20 different documents have been signed in terms of cooperation, not only in trade or agriculture or science, but also and specifically in transport area. And 2 MOUs specifically on the middle corridor and road cooperation. So we see this as a huge step forward. The potential of the BRI initiative is only starting to show. It is a project that will continue to benefit in years to come, and we look forward to working in spirit of friendship and partnership with our Chinese colleagues to make this happen. Just to mention also, the middle corridor has doubled its capacity in last year. So the middle corridor is, we see it as one of the possible best alternatives to the other alternative routes that are present right now, because it is the fastest, ecologically sustainable, very effective and quick road to deliver goods from Asia to China and from China to Asia. And this has proven to be true. All the figures show that. The economic and trade turnover between China and Kazakhstan has risen significantly in past few years, and last year we have reached over 30 billion turnover. This is a historic benchmark. We will continue to work on that together with the China government. And I would like to also mention that it is important that we are here in Brussels and right sitting next to the Berlaymont building of the European Commission. And the European Commission have sanctioned a study of the EBRD on the sustainable development of the middle corridor that offers a number of concrete measures and steps to continue developing this very important Trans-Caspian route. And we think that the joint work of all the interested partners will bring the good benefits for that. Thank you.
Well, let me bring in Alicia. I know Google has been doing some work on the facts and the figures and doing some research. Tell us what you've been working on, please.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Okay, that's wonderful. It's a pleasure to be here with the ambassador, the other speakers, to talk about indeed a landmark project. China, China's soft power, in my view, is very well depicted in the BRI, but also the economic power, and that's how the BRI started. In fact, our first study on the BRI was all about trade. I mean, how much trade could the BRI create in the world, including in Europe? And we came up with some positive numbers for Europe, around 6% increase in trade thanks to the new routes which China was creating. We warned, however, that if China were to create a free trade area within the BRI, which, by the way, hasn't happened, so that warning never came true. But I just want to say it out loudly because it does show that things can change in terms of benefits over time. If China were to create a free trade area within the BRI, Europe would become a loser out of this project. So a lot of the benefits versus cost depend very much on the evolution of this project. The other study that has actually been mentioned by the ambassador on sentiment is actually an updated study. We did this twice on the evolution of sentiment. So indeed, the average sentiment about the BRI is slightly positive. It's based on basically global media for every country in the world, including Kazakhstan, which happens to be much more positive than average on BRI. I have to confirm what we just heard. But the trend in that sentiment is actually underwhelming, in the sense that the average sentiment has actually plummeted across the globe. There are some regions like Central Asia where the sentiment continues to be very positive, followed by Africa, and much, much less so Europe. Now, one could try to figure out why this is the case. There's two events in our analysis that kind of explain that worsening in the sentiment. One is COVID, and one could understand that because it was a moment of total confusion globally as to what was going on. And the second is the war in Ukraine. And I think this second event, I think, really should ring the bell as to how Europeans are portraying the world at the current juncture. The third analysis we've conducted at Bruegel, which is not yet published and hopefully will be published soon, is about the changing narrative or the changing nature of the BRI. And I want to end with those words. In our understanding, the BRI started as a very economic project. So basically, huge amounts, we heard from the ambassador, around $1 trillion US in both FDI and loans, with quite an imbalance, I have to say, share of loans versus investment, which fortunately, in my view, has corrected recently. So now we have slightly above 50% of the total amounts funded by China for infrastructure into FDI, rather than before barely 20%. So that there is a change. I think this is related to the fact that probably there's been over leverage from the recipient countries for these infrastructure projects, and China now is more keen to invest, whether it's greenfield into, for example, green tech, etc. So this is becoming more balanced. But I do have to say that the amounts are much smaller than they used to be. So they're hovering about 20 billion rather than the 50 billion around that we had for loans and investment in the past. So it is more balanced, it is smaller, maybe rightly so, because maybe the pace was just very hard to absorb by the host countries, the borrowers. And the question is, where is it heading? In that narrative, our view, and I end here, is that it's becoming less of that economic angle by which China lends for others to build their infrastructure, which could be a win-win, certainly for the two countries involved, but rather more of a security, of a overall security, soft and perhaps one day hard power proposition. And we see this because of the narrative, Global Security Initiative, Global Civilization Initiative, which Global Development Initiative, three initiatives that in a way give shape to what this BRI is meant to be. Much more of a cohesive part of the world, and perhaps less so of an infra-led strategy. I leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alicia. You've raised lots of interesting points that we will come back to and touch on in the discussion, in particular things like green and where we should be headed versus where we are headed, and this translation of and the evolution of the BRI. But let me turn, Wen, to you. Give us your opening thoughts and feel free to react to what you've heard from your fellow speakers.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Actually, I just arrived in Europe last night from Beijing. I just very eager to communicate with European old friend, because of the COVID-19, I haven't been in Europe for 4 years. So today I think it's very significant. As a Chinese scholar focusing on studying global governance, actually the Belt and Road Initiative is one of my research focus. And in the past 10 years, I have been to nearly 100 countries to investigate and research many local projects of the Belt and Road. I'm very willing to share some practical experience. And in the recent months, we all know that the discussion about BRI 10th anniversary is very popular. I saw some Western media and the scholars who have very negative views on the BRI. And there are some constructive views that China should listen to it, but many irresponsible criticism, rumors, and even curses we should fight back. As my one of my core idea today is that in the past 10 years, there have been many significant changes in the world as well as China because of the BRI. And from the perspective of the significant contrast between 10 years, the BRI really has indeed changed China as well as the world. So I let me very quickly introduce the 3 points of the conditions, change conditions to the world. And later, if I have more time, I can introduce how BRI changed China. I think at least in the past 10 years, the BRI changed the world in 3 perspectives. First perspective is the development level. As Ambassador Fu Chong right now, he said, the BRI really improved more and more countries' own well-being, especially those non-Western country, developing country. They cooperate with China. They have more and more Chinese investment and constructive, especially infrastructure constructive. So as Fu Chong, Ambassador Fu Chong quote a lot of data. I have share the other data to audience. For example, in Africa, in the past 10 plus years, China has built more than 6,000 kilometers of railway and 10,000 kilometers highways and in Africa, and more than 20 ports, and more than 80 major infrastructure, and 80% of telecommunication facility. And in the past 10 years, China has opened more than 1,300 new routes with Belt and Road countries. And in more than 80 countries, China opened a new bank outlets or financial cooperation service. And China average annual foreign investment has remained at 150 billion US dollars. And more China capital flow to the BRI countries. And according to the statistic, BRI adds additional 1 to 3.4% of the actual national local revenue of the country along the route. And a large number of the ironic BRI projects, such as a lot of very big projects, such as Mongolia, such as Mombasa, Nairobi Railway, the Chinese Laos Railway, the Jakarta Wanglong Railway, are completely and operated to benefit the local countries. And the BRI also strengthened the mutual awareness of China and more developing countries. Each year, more than 400,000 BRI countries' young students go to China for study. And China established the Confucius Institute, Lubang Workshop, and Cultural Center in more than 100 countries. So that's my first point I want to share. That is, BRI really helped more and more developing country for next steps of development. That first. Because of the first point, I think the second point is that those BRI countries, they rejoice, they rethink themselves and rejoice the future road. Because in the past, the developing country, they admire West. They often regarded the so-called Western consensus as only a reference for countries' development path. the result of the BRI cooperation in the 10 years shows that the Chinese economy experience focusing on infrastructure is more applicable to the emerging country, the developing country, the underdeveloped country. More importantly, I think the higher redeeming rate of China infrastructure production capacity and trade investment, especially a set of operation model from planning to design, from financing to construction, from operational to return to the laws, so that developing country that has been trapped in technology and capital dilemmas long time, now they can more unlocked to the successful path. So nowadays, more and more developing countries, they are thinking in depth, because I have a lot of African friends, a lot of ASEAN friends, a lot of Latin American friends. They are all thinking, why China in the past 40 years, 40 years ago, China is so poor, but now, 40 years past, China can develop so quickly. They have China's experience. They need reference. They need them, even comprehensively copy China's experience. So I think this is very important to give the reference development experience to the developing country. That's the second point. Final point I want to share is that from the strategic feedback, I think a BRI even has been forcing Western countries to reflect themselves, adjust Western foreign strategy in the 10 years, right? In the past 10 years, Western countries have studied more than 3,000 reports. In terms of my calculation, more than 3,000 research reports on BII. They just learn from the BII, and for example, the G7 summit, they launched the so-called B3W, build back, better world, right? And also they push the PGRI, Global Infrastructure Partnership, are all the two initiative, new initiatives are all inspired by the BRI cooperation, and has to compete. They want to compete with the BRI in order to maintain the so-called Western hegemony. So I think no matter, well, I think if Western countries can really reflect on themselves, because a very obvious condition is that in the past 70 plus years, especially since the end of the World War II, on the leadership of the West, the world, but the problem is that 70 years passed, those poor countries are still very, very poor. But rich countries, they develop, face the more and more dilemma. So I think they need reflect themselves. But if they can really reflect themselves, increase their efforts to cooperate, and try to contribute to the world much more than before, I think if that we welcome. So I think it's the other side of contribution from the BRI to the Western countries. That's my first point. Thank you so much. Again.
Thank you so much. And indeed, thank you to all for this very interesting opening round. I see a lot of questions coming in already. So I think for our future rounds, let's try to be brief. Ambassador, let's start with the elephant in the room that I think Alicia alluded to in terms of sentiment. And there is some skepticism about the BRI. How do you tackle that, particularly in light of Europe's strategic autonomy policy?
Actually, when it comes to the BRI, whether this is good or bad, I think we need to listen more to the receiving countries. I think that that's the only fair. So we know that there is a lot of criticism in the Western media and also from the Western government sometimes. But actually, we will, as far as we go, we will continue to do that because we care more about the reactions from the recipient states, especially in the global South. And in Europe, actually, first let me say that in Europe itself, there are some flagship projects I mentioned in my speech, like the port in Greece, the railway in the Serbia, and also in the bridge in Croatia, and so in all these countries, BRI is very positively received. And with respect to other countries, and as far as China is concerned, we are ready to cooperate. And I will say that we are heartened to see that the BRI has motivated some major initiatives on the part of the Western countries. Just now, Dr. Wang mentioned that the latest IMEC and also the Global Gateway initiative from Europe. And actually, we see this as a good thing. Even though some of the Western politicians say that all these are counterbalancing, are counterweights to the BRI, but in our view, we do not see them as a counterweight. We see them as a complementary initiative, and we do really think that, because we know that the world needs much more investment in terms of the basic infrastructure in the global South. And China alone cannot afford to make all these happen. So we welcome all these initiatives. So there is no reason that we should become counterweights or counterbalances against each other. So we hope that we can cooperate, and we are willing to do that. Actually, there are some projects that are already have taken off in Africa, and also I personally have met with the special envoy of the EU on Central Asia, and she is very interested in having all these joint projects in Central Asian countries. So I think as we enter the second decade for the BRI, the sentiments towards the BRI will definitely improve. And I'm not so concerned about some of the criticism launched by the Western media. And I think facts speak louder than words. What we need to do is to concentrate on what we do and let the facts show to the world what BRI is really all about. Thank you.
Well, you mentioned, of course, the Global Gateway, and as have many people online. Finbar Birmingham indeed said and pointed to something within the EU, Mr. Borrell saying the Global Gateway and the BRI are not exclusive, that they can, as you say, work together. And yet President von der Leyen has said that the Global Gateway will compete with the BRI so that countries have an alternative model. Alicia, perhaps I could ask you to weigh in on that. Where does the EU's Global Gateway fit with the history that we've seen already of 10 years of the BRI and the Global Gateway perhaps playing a little bit of catch-up? Alicia, you're on mute.
Apologies.
Thank you.
I would start by saying, if you can hear me, that I think there's many more development models than the West or China's. We can go back in history to the 80s and the new industrialization policies of Latin America, which didn't work out, but they were not Western policies. They were totally endogenous to what was believed to be the right thing to do. That model of industrial policy that was based on import substitution. So, I'm just saying that there's many up and downs in development theories that are intrinsic to developing countries. And on that note, I think the Global Gateway, in a way, takes account of that, but with a major theme, which is, of course, greening the world. I think that if there is a flagship there, which you may consider Western, I hope we all consider it global, because otherwise we probably have a problem with that. But I guess that's the main issue about the Global Gateway, that it intends to be as decarbonizing as possible. And if I read van der Leyen's word, I would say that that's something that, in principle, she expects the Global Gateway to do better. And of course, we could argue that the BRI itself, and we already have a green BRI, so for sure it's evolving into a more green strategy. But I guess that's still an evolution. I think what Europe is trying to propose is a greening infrastructure flagship that basically gets there as soon as possible in terms of not building still brown infrastructure. And that's all from this side.
Timur, as someone from a third country, neither EU nor China, what's your perspective on how the Global Gateway and the BRI might fit together complementarily to multiply, as you say, rather than just be the sum of their parts?
Well, I would like to pick up on what Ambassador has said, that the BRI and the Global Gateway, we don't see these two initiatives as competitive. In fact, we strongly believe sorry, that these two initiatives have common goals, and therefore there need to be some sort of coordination and some sort of possibility to find the niches for cooperation within these two global serious projects. Even though, as Alicia has mentioned, the Global Gateway has a rather wider aspect of the areas. It starts from climate change to digitalization to green transportation, hydrogen, and many other topics. As we actually look forward to the Global Gateway Forum, I think in the middle of October. So, and the way the Global Gateway is implemented is also a bit different from the BRI project. But namely, the ultimate goal, I think, is very similar, and therefore we don't see as a problem when these two mega projects need to be put together and find a way to how to cooperate. And Ambassador also mentioned that Madame Terry Hakala was in Beijing, I think, recently, and we're glad to hear that this was one of the topics that you have discussed.
We've also had raised the fourth East-West corridor, the IMEC, the India, Middle East, EU corridor. And Greg Burchill online is asking, what are the advantages of the BRI and the Middle Corridor compared to the IMEC? Ambassador, would you like to tell us where you see those two in relation to one another?
You mean BRI and IMEC?
IMEC, yeah.
Actually, on the IMEC, we don't know much about that initiative, do we? And we need to learn more details about that. But so I don't want to compare these two. As we know that according to the report, some of the U.S. Scholars and officials are saying that they are serving as a counterweight against China or anything like that. Again, as I said, if they are purely for developmental purposes, we do not see that as a counterbalance. Again, for whatever the initiative, if the real purpose is for the development of the region, so we do not see China as having anything negative about them. So, but since you mentioned just now, the speakers talk about it's going to be a competition between the development models and so on and so forth. Let me see how we see this. And actually, if we talk about whether it's going to be a greener model of development, I think there is no competition. There is only cooperation. There is no differences between BRI or any other the global gateway, because as I said, for the next decade, the BRI is also evolving, and as I said in my speech, the green is a distinctive color of the BRI. So we are actually putting a lot of emphasis on green development, on digital cooperation. But I do want to draw attention of people to some basic facts about the BRI. When it comes to the BRI, there are a lot of good experiences that have accumulated over the past 10 years. Some of the things we feel very distinctly can be positive lessons to, if you like, for the Global Gateway or IMEC, is that the project need to be host country driven. So China never imposes any project on any country. It's always the country that comes up with a project, and China comes in with help, with assistance. So that is a very good experience that we want to share with potential investors. And the second good point I want to share is that the basic principle of the BRI is what we called the principle or the triple principle of reciprocity. That is reciprocity in consultation, reciprocity in construction, and reciprocity in benefit sharing. So at the early stage, at the planning stage, the China and the partner countries actually will coordinate and plan together. That's very important. And it's not China actually come up with a product and try to sell that to the country. And also when it comes to the construction, we also have a lot of cooperation. China uses the local labor force. That's why in my speech we mentioned about how many jobs that China has created in those infrastructure construction. So that's what we call the reciprocity in construction. And more importantly, the reciprocity in benefit sharing. So we see the BRI projects more from the economic aspect. Indeed, I do not deny that in the process, China's soft power increases, because if you do good things to the country, of course, you will be positively received. So, but that is not our initial objective. Our initial objective is to engage on an equal footing. I think that is also important for Western countries. You need to engage with the countries on an equal footing and on a cooperative manner, so that countries can reap the benefit on an equal footing, equitably. We do not pretend to be the savior of the world. The Chinese companies are going there for their own purposes, for their own benefits. But at the same time, we also bring benefits to the local people. And so that's why in our engagement with the governments and with the people, with the communities, we always do this on an equal footing, on an equitable basis. So my advice to the Global Gateway Initiative and to the IMEC, if you want to compare these two, if you can do as China has done in terms of giving the sense of equity to the Global South countries, you will do well. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me turn back, Wen, to you, Dr. Wang. We've talked there a little bit on the question of green dividends and sustainability. Do you also see that the BRI is bringing in that digital dividend, taking advantage of the technological advances? And how do those two things interplay together?
Yes. First of all, I really agree with Ambassador Fu Chong said. I suggest that between Europe and China, we don't mention too much about competition. I think Europe and China has more much more cooperation opportunities than competition. I think why European, so many European scholars, practitioners, or think tank, they media, they like to regard competition to describe the relationship uh, between China and Europe recent years. Maybe they are influenced too much by the America, because the Biden administration they like use the competition to describe U.S.-China relationship. For China, as Ambassador Fu said, also for the Miss Chair, you talking about. I think you and China, we have so many cooperation opportunity and space, not only in the green climate change, but also in the for the contribution for the third world. I think one thing is very interesting. European countries has to admit China's contribution or China's thinking or design. That is 10 years of the BRI has proven that the rise of China has not brought colonization, has not brought disaster, has not brought war, has not brought refugee or the other crisis, but the 10 years BRI brought the world trade, commodity, tourists, infrastructure, and economic growth, and more civilization condition. I think this is what any Western countries, when they are rising, they didn't do in his history, in their history. So I think these are very obvious conditions. But I have to admit too, of course, the new things will inevitably be accompanied by confusion. Um, just as, for example, during the 10th anniversary of the reform and opening up policy, since Deng Xiaoping, if we think over the 10th anniversary of the reform and opening up, that is in the 1988, right? 10th anniversary. But that time, a lot of Western media, they still suspect China's reform and opening up policy. But now, this year, is the 45 years of reform and opening up. No one deny the contribution of the reform and opening up policy. So I think the BRI is only very short, only 10 years. So let's look long term, use a long term to observe the BRI's future. I think we'll wait for maybe 20 years, 30 years, 40 years or more. Maybe everyone will admire the greatness of the BRI as a great way to recognize reform and opening up policy now. So that's my second point. Third point, I suggest my European audience or friends that I think we really can travel or can ask those developing countries thinking. You can ask a Kenya friend talking about Nigeria, talking about ask the questions to Nairobi, Mombasa friends, ask questions to the Laos friends, even ask the question to the Egypt friends. They can tell you the in their heart, that how great or how significant of the BRI, because BRI really bring the very real well-being and benefit dividend to the local development. So I think, but to my honest, China really it's a developing country. We just try our best to contribute the world. So it's only the first decades, but give us the more and more time. So I think we can do better. That's my point. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's interesting that you raised the question of US-China relations just this week, as officials have been meeting in Malta using the EU as their staging board for those talks with a view to the future. Alicia, let me bring you back in to get your reaction to some of those points. We haven't really mentioned the US up to now, but obviously as a global player, they're involved to a certain point, certainly as a centre of gravity. I also am interested in your views on the Opening Up project. Give us your thoughts, please.
Well, I mean, I think the Belt and Road Initiative was at the very beginning not even an issue in the US. I still remember that it was kind of downplayed as a non-important strategy. Nothing as wrong, frankly speaking, as that, because it is an important strategy, and I think the US has realized that China has gained a lot of soft power through this strategy. Again, it's not only about infrastructure. Of course, infrastructure helps, but there's also more that is being brought by China being present in so many countries in the world, including, to be frank, the fact that this infrastructure is very much hub and spoke, meaning that it links China with a huge number of countries in a way that these countries actually tend to trade so much more with China as a consequence of the infrastructure. So in a way, the US is, of course, now finally aware of what is all boiling down to, which is that most countries in the world by now, the largest number of countries in the world, has China as a first trading partner, and the BRI is part of the reason why this is the case. So I think this explains the US response, still, of course, a piecemeal response to the BRI, and perhaps aware that response is not enough because the US is not able to offer free trade agreements or the amount of resources needed to come up with other types of infrastructure for these countries. It's basically coming with its own industrial policy. In a way, if you want my market, you come and play along. I have to say very honestly that in a way, this is just another way to see industrial policy also in China. I mean, the US is not the only country in the world doing industrial policy, I have to say. But the fact that they are reacting this way, to me, shows the limits of the US in mimicking a BRI. I think that's, in a way, a reason why the US is using a different strategy.
Thank you. Another question from an audience member, Benedict Flam, is saying that in Hungary, some companies that are related to BRI investments are accused of not being sufficiently environmentally conscious. Timur, in Kazakhstan, do you have some of these same issues, that there's an effort to show that you're being green as well as simply say that you're being green when it's in conjunction with BRI investments? And how might we deal with that? Is it some sort of labeling? Is it some sort of transparency?
Well, at the moment, there is no such an example that I could refer to that relates to BRI or not being green or meeting some ecological standards. But what I can say is that Kazakhstan has introduced its internal regulations and codes that relate to environmental obligations, and those derive from the COP27 and COP previous obligations like Paris. And there we have made a very clear statement to the world that we will try to be carbon neutral by 2060. And from this perspective, everything is being watched. And so no matter from what sort of project the investments or the infrastructure is coming, be it the BRI or any other global initiative, it all is viewed from the perspective of meeting the newest and the most latest green standards.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to have a final question for the ambassador before I go to a final round of expectations or hopes or aspirations. Steph Clement has asked, what can we expect from the upcoming third BRI forum in October, especially in light of President Xi's renewed emphasis on small but beautiful projects?
Yes, actually, we are going to hold this third forum in mid-October, and this is to celebrate the achievement of the past decade and chart the way forward. And yes, as I said, we will continue with this great initiative, and we will move in in lockstep with the world in terms of green transition and the digital transition. And actually, if you look at the concrete projects, actually green is already one of the basic elements, and both in terms of the projects that are being invested in, for instance, in the renewable energy, and also the way the infrastructures are being built, like they're built in greener ways, if you like. And so that may be a direction. And also, yes, small and beautiful. Yes, that is also one of the underlying principles of BRI. And by the way, just now people mentioned this, the Global Development Initiative. Actually, these are working in conjunction with each other. So we are trying our best to help with the developing countries, other developing countries, in meeting the UN SDGs. And we believe that through the small projects to improve the livelihood of the local people, this is the most direct way to lift people out of poverty and to meet the goal of the UN SDG Sustainable Development Goals. So indeed, that may be another direction that we will be moving in. So and we'll actually. So another point I want to emphasize is that, as I said, China is, for the BRA, is not what I call the solo show of China. So by inviting all these countries to Beijing, we are actually poised to listen to the views of countries. And together, this is a joint effort. So together, we can decide on which direction this BRI should be moving forward to. Thank you.
Wen, a final word from you. What do you see as the direction of travel for the next 10 years?
First of all, I've got to answer your question right now about the green definition. I have to say that in so-called green Silk Road is a core content of the BRI. I don't know whether you know. 2 years ago, China announced that in the future, China will totally cancel all the thermal power investment worldwide. And also, 3 years ago, China announced the carbon neutrality strategy. And sorry, excuse me. We want to achieve the carbon neutrality before 2060. And since that, China now invests nearly $1 trillion in green industry every year. And as we all know, nowadays in China, the photovoltaic power, wind power, solar energy, industrial are all globally leading, right? So I think we focus on the the green industrial. Also, we want to share the green development experience in the in the BI. And final point I want to share is that, sorry, because I just arrived in Loma last night, and this morning I jogging all around the old cities of Rome. I look at those old buildings. I can imagine how greatness of the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago. And then Europe developed very quickly. And in the past 200 years, 100 years, for China side, we really learn a lot from the European countries. China's first generation's leader, some of them, or most of them, they study abroad, study in in the Europe, in France and the other country. And why? Because Europe contribute the world a lot 100 years ago. And but problem is so that's why we learn from Europe. But now China become the second largest economy 10 plus years ago. We want to contribute to the world. So I think the first point we want to say is that we should learn from the better. Who's the better? Who we should learn from? So this Confucius told us. So I think for European countries, I think we need push the mutual learning among the civilization. So if we have the competition, we can a competition for the contribution for the world. We can have the competition for learning more. So this is my final point for sharing.
Thank you very much. Alicia, I realize I'm slightly asking you to look into a crystal ball and predict the future, but give us your thoughts on what might lie ahead.
I think we can't negate the fact that the world is becoming more fragmented and that we are increasingly seeing two ecosystems, whether it's because of de-risking or tech decoupling or you name it. So for me, the BRI constitutes kind of the origin of one of these two ecosystems, basically hub in China and spoken in all of the BRI countries. Now, as we speak, of course, those countries that feel more comfortable in the other ecosystem led by the US will probably within the traditional BRI will probably move elsewhere. This is the case of Italy already, and there may be others. And others probably will jump into the BRI because they feel uncomfortable in the Western ecosystem. But I think that's what the BRI will become, kind of economic, soft power, maybe even security power to define one part of the world.
I want to say a few words actually in response to that. Indeed, the world is being more fragmented. But let us remember, whether the world is moving to fragmentation depends on our choice. It's not a natural evolution that the world should be fragmented. It all depends on our choice. BRI is a project that promotes globalization. If we go to the other part of the world to jointly develop, we see that as part of globalization. So that's why we would like to advise to the Western politicians. So do not see this as an effort to undermine the West, so that becomes a basis or an excuse for you to fragment, to make the world more fragmented. We don't think that is that's how the BRI should be looked at, and that's why we have been emphasizing for all those initiatives coming from Europe, coming from the United States, when it comes to the global gateway, to whatever initiative you have, don't put it against the BRI. We do not see them as something that is against BRI. We see them as a complementary. So that is the mentality. I think that's very important. If we see this as competition, even sometimes even geopolitical competition, so it goes beyond economics, that's very dangerous. I don't think that will be welcomed by the other parts of the world, by the global south. So we do not need more ideological division. There is no need for geopolitical division. And in our case, we want to promote a more globalized effort in the developments of all quarters, of all corners of the world. So don't try to put your initiative against the BRI. It is not. It's not going to work because it will not be welcomed by the global south, and there is no need for this. Just now you mentioned the high-level engagement between China and the U.S. Indeed, tensions need to be reduced, not enhanced, and having a more relaxed international environment is going to be beneficial to all sides. So that is an appeal that China has been making to the Western countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Timur, a final thought from you?
Well, a final thought is that if there is a competition, the competition needs to be healthy. And as was said, Kazakhstan views the global initiatives, including one like BRI, from the perspective of not political competition or geopolitical competitions, but we see it as and view it clearly as an opportunity to cooperate closer in areas like trade, economy, green energy, transportation, and many other areas. So from the point of view of a country like Kazakhstan, such initiatives are welcomed and need to be present. And if there is a presence of alternatives, as long as it's healthy and trade and rule-based competition, it is more than welcome. Thank you.
Ambassador, I think you've made your points quite well, but if you have a final comment you want to make before we say goodbye.
Well, I already made my final point. My final appeal to European countries is that let's work together for the benefit of the global south and for the for the entire world. And there is no need for us to have all these competition. And as I said, throughout my intervention today, we see our initiatives as complementary towards each other. And we also believe, by extension, we also believe that globalization is still the beneficial. We do not accept that it is already something that has become a fait accompli, as if that the world is going to be fragmented. And I'm sure all of you have read the very important article in the Foreign Affairs by the IMF director. If the world gets further fragmented, the GDP, the global GDP will reduce by a certain percentage, and the whole world will lose. And we do believe that common sense can prevail in this regard. So geopolitics, there is no need for geopolitics when it comes to the economic cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you to all our speakers, to Timur Sultan Kozin, to Alicia Garcia Herrero, Dr. Wang Wen, and of course, Ambassador Fu Qiong. Thank you to the audience for your attention, for all your great questions, and to the whole team at Euractiv. If you've enjoyed this debate and this discussion, remember you can find out more Euractiv debates by following the hashtag EA Debates. And we hope to see you again soon. Have a great day.